everybody, and welcome back to the Insert Wisdom Podcast, episode number 10. I don't really have any updates to share with you other than the podcast has hit over 1,200 downloads, so I want to thank you so much for that. It's just endlessly exciting to watch the podcast grow and see you guys leave reviews on Spotify and Apple. It just helps the podcast to grow. And again, just seeing that this Insert Wisdom podcast has been listened to in 34 countries so far is just mind-blowing. So once again, I want to thank you guys for listening and making this impulse that I had to create a podcast, something that I had been wanting to do for a long time, into something more tangible and real, and something that I actually feel like maybe there are people out there who enjoy listening to me talk about stuff, which ties into today's episode in a way, because I really wanted to sit down and talk about stories. Stories that we tell ourselves, our life stories, books, and how we use stories to inform our own lives, or when we are really interested in certain stories. Again, how many times can I say the word story in this episode? But what stories mean to us as a collective people living in today's crazy times. I also thought I'd mention that there's something that I might be doing in the future, and that is incorporating voice notes that I've recorded into podcast episodes, because quite often I'll kind of get hit with random thoughts throughout the day and I'll just jot them down in a voice note, and so I might be cutting some of those into this episode. We'll see how it goes. But I recently finished Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, which is book 4 in the Stormlight archives. Brandon Sanderson is an extremely popular fantasy writer. I think he's probably one of the most well-known fantasy writers alive today. He's known for very intricate world building. And if you're familiar with the Stormlight archives, the first book is 1,000 pages. And then each book after that gets progressively longer. Rhythm of War, I think Oathbringer's longer, but Rhythm of War is 1,232 pages. And there's one book left in the series, and it is, I think, definitively the longest. But there was something I noticed about that book. First of all, there will be no spoilers of that book in this episode in case you were wanting to read it. But there were, let's just cut right to it. It was not for me. I definitely did not enjoy reading it nearly as much as the first 3. And if you're an engineer type, I think you would absolutely love this book. It's all about the magic system and how it's kind of corrupted, and what the main POV has to do to get it up and working again. But it was more like attending a physics lecture than reading a fantasy book, you know? And I don't know about you, but for me, when I read fantasy because I want to know the characters and feel the epicness of the world, and I want to escape to that world, you know? And this one just had me feeling like I had a headache, if anything else, you know? I do have a Goodreads, by the way, if you ever want to read my book reviews. But it kind of got me thinking about why we read stories. And of course, there are many reasons why, but one of them, I think, is because we like to read about characters going through difficult things, right? Because you really can't have a story without conflict. There is a newer genre coming about recently, like cozy fantasy, cozy sci-fi, cozy horror even. And basically what that just means is that the stakes aren't as high. So it's like pure vibes, I guess you could say. But we read stories because we want to read about these characters going through difficult things and being transformed by the end. You know, stories are primarily a way for us to learn about ourselves and to maybe ascribe meaning to, like, well, this character went through this, so that means I can get through this. But the thing about Rhythm of War, you know, it's the fourth book in a series. And I'm an author myself. You know, I have my first book I published. It went out last October on Amazon. And I'm currently writing my second book. But I have nothing but respect for Brandon Sanderson. I think he's an incredible author. Like, I don't know how he weaves all of these threads together. It's so good, and he's a master at world building. But I was seeing, at least in my opinion in this book, that he may or may not have been having a hard time knowing what to do next with his characters, because and I don't think this is a spoiler at all, but you don't really get a lot of character arcs in book 4. Like, you could argue that there are a few that by the end, yes, they have gone through something difficult and they've changed by the end. I mean, that's one of the basic tenets of good storytelling is, does this character change from beginning to end? And if they don't, then we usually think that they're boring, right? And I think a lot of newer books that are written kind of forget that sometimes. I think a lot of books would rather tell you who a character is instead of showing you. And that works for a lot of readers, obviously, but it's just something that I've noticed has been missing more and more from more modern books. But anyway, it becomes really hard to sustain a reader's interest when you have a character go through a major arc in the first 2 books, and then if they don't really have one by book 3 or 4, you either have to completely take them in a new direction and start a new arc, which doesn't always land super well. Like, I'm thinking about ACOTAR, for example, A Court of Thorns and Roses, that series by Sarah J. Maas. And if you're familiar with it, hi, I love that series, which I will want to talk about more in a second. But Rhysand is a character that everybody was in love with the first 3 books, and then by the last 2, I saw that a lot of people were like, I don't like him as much. And you could argue that that's because of different point of views in the story, but also because he already went through his arc, right? And there's only a character is supposed to be a 3-dimensional living, breathing person, right? But there's only so much you can write into a character, because essentially characters are meant to illustrate something about the human experience, right? Or they're supposed to inspire something, go through some major transformation, and then by the end they're different. Rhythm of War didn't really have that with a lot of its characters, and it became very in-depth about something that I personally did not give a shit about. The metrics, the systems in the story. And it just made me think about why we like to read stories. And it's either because of the reasons that I said, or it's escapism, or it's just a book that really delivers on vibes, right? Like I said, ACOTAR is a series that I've been rereading. And full disclosure, like, I know that a ton of people hate this series. A lot of people think that it is overly visible and it's just fairy smut and, whatever, stuff like that. It really isn't. I think the people who say that haven't read them. And while I don't think that they're the best written books in the world, you can't deny that what Sarah J. Maas has done with that series is that she has inspired millions of new readers to pick up books again, right? And she provided something that meant a lot to a lot of people. So that had me thinking, well, what is that? Is it the escapism? Is it the world that she built? Is it the characters? Is it just like the fairies are really hot or something? And I don't know, maybe readers just want to read about that. But I can only speak from my own experience with that series. And, you know, it's like recently I've been feeling not lost, but just sort of deflated, like not really knowing why I'm here, what am I doing? And the whole thing that sparked this episode in particular was okay, this is going to sound weird. I'm reading a book right now called Sky Daddy by Kate Folk, and it's all about this woman who well, just to be very frank about it, she is sexually attracted to planes, and she believes that the way that she and a plane can live together forever is if a plane chooses her and they crash, basically. It's like, I know that sounds crazy, and but it's actually quite endearing the way that it's written, and I think it's meant to highlight, in a weird way, like the human experience, because her life outside of this thing that she has is quite mundane, right? Like she has this dead-end job. She doesn't really have a lot of friends. Her life is quite quirky and random, but she still somehow ends up on track. I'm not even like halfway through the book, so that's not spoiling anything, but like then that had me thinking about that of like, okay, do we, even in our times like I'm going through right now when I'm feeling low and just sitting in my room all day reading or not really doing much, is that also a part of my story? You know? And I was reading this book and the character was talking about how flying was like one of the very few things that gave her life any meaning. And the phrase popped up in my head. I was like, well, what is my story? What has my story been? And maybe that's something I will unpack more in this episode as I continue speaking, but maybe it'll be another one. I don't know. I think we read stories to feel less alone, to get a bit of escapism. Our favorite characters usually will say something about ourselves, whether it's like unclaimed parts of ourselves, something we wish we could experience, a world we wish we could go to. And maybe, you know, in this recent period of time when I have felt sort of unseen, uncared about, not really knowing why I'm here, that kind of thing. That's when I started rereading ACOTAR. I read the first two books like a year and a half ago, and then I read book 3 and 3 and 4. I think I read in 2024, and book 5 I read this year, maybe. No, it was last year. My timeline's all over the place, but essentially, if you don't know what the story is in this series, it's about a girl named Farah. She and her family are quite poor at the beginning of the series. She's the only one who tries to take care of them, basically. And one day she's in the woods and she kills this wolf who she thinks may or may not be a fairy, but she doesn't know. She takes it back to her family and they butcher it, you know, for food. And then basically this other fairy bursts into the cabin demanding retribution. And so she has to go live in the fairy realms because of what she did. And humans have been told stories for millennia about these beings and how cruel they are. So she obviously doesn't want to go. But she goes, obviously, or there wouldn't be a story. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about it at this point, for the people who somehow don't know what it's about, but I guess I won't say anything else about it. But it's kind of, maybe it's something that a lot of us yearn for, in the sense of like just the sheer magnitude of how successful this series has been. Each and every one of us wants to feel special, right? We want to feel, it's the same thing of like getting a letter in the mail from Hogwarts, right? Like, I want to go to this magical place and realize that there's more for me out there. And one day it just shows up, and then you go and you realize your potential, right? And she goes and she becomes this powerful person who gets to live in this beautiful, fantastical world. And one of the things about ACOTAR, what I was saying earlier about what makes a good story, like ACOTAR, I couldn't really tell you what the hell the plot of these books are. Like these books are pure vibes and relationships and I guess world building, but that world building doesn't really have a plot. Like, sure, there's wars in the books, but that's not really what's important, But I think what Sarah J. Maas created in that world was just a place that so many people want to live in. Because, I guess the current timeline we live in is insane, right? People need escape. I don't think that it's a surprise that these books started really gaining traction in 2020 when the pandemic came around. We need stories to serve as a mirror to ourselves. We need them for escapism, to learn about ourselves, to watch a character go through something difficult and transform by the end. Like, there's always a message in a story. Like, that's the whole point of stories, to be a mirror and to cause us to ask questions about ourselves. Even if it's just like a cozy fantasy book, right? Like, there's always something to be learned from it, even if it's just pure enjoyment of like, I don't know, if you're somebody who loves cozy fantasy, maybe it's because you need something soft and enjoyable because maybe life is chaotic and there's too many things going on. Like, I know, what's it called? Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies is widely popular, and that's considered cozy fantasy. But I'm just so grateful for stories, because even when I'm sitting at my desk right now recording this and reading these books, I can still travel in my mind to these beautiful other realms where it's like I can be immortal for a time and just be surrounded by beauty and wealth and all these things and just not think about the fact for a time that I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know what makes me happy right now. I don't know anything really. And those are hard questions to wrestle with on your own. And sometimes stories can make you feel a little less alone in that. And so I'm just eternally grateful for them for that reason. Because even a story about a woman who is sexually attracted to a plane can make me go, what is my story? And those, that question is not somehow tied to the subject matter of this story, but that's the beauty of stories. And, there's always, I've talked about this a lot before, but people in the world today seem to think that there's only one way of doing things, or that if you don't have a 5-year plan, or you don't exactly know what it is that makes you happy or makes you like you don't have a mission statement or whatever, then you're somehow failing or falling behind. And I don't think that that is true at all. I think there are a multitude of ways to ask the same question. And for me, that's the whole reason I sat down to film this episode, because of that question that popped into my head of like, what is my story? And, don't worry, I'm not going to sit here and take you through that story in this episode from beginning to end, because there is no end yet. But also I suspect that maybe that wouldn't be the most interesting thing. But I can say that there has been a theme. And that theme has been a girl, a young woman, and now woman, who is always looking up. Regardless of whatever happens, there's always an inner knowing, an inner resilience that she comes back to regardless of outside circumstances, because there is no other way of believing that there is something more out there, regardless of whatever has happened. I'm not entirely sure what archetype that is, but we have more in common with these supposedly fictional characters and worlds and stories than we think. So I guess what I'll end this episode with is, what has been your story? What have been things that have defined your life so far? Is there a theme, or are there types of stories or characters or genres that just pull you in? Is there something there that makes you go, I see myself here? Because I love hearing about those things from people. So as always, feel free to reach out to me on Threads. That's the primary place that most people can get a hold of me. I will pretty much always see every single comment or mention, but stories are really what tie us together. And I think we need more things more than ever that will tie us together so that we can have understanding and empathy. So with that, I'm probably going to go back to reading more of Sky Daddy and maybe a bit of ACOMAF, which is the second book in the ACOTAR series. It's 11:42 p.m., so I'll probably read for another hour or so. But yeah, I guess that's the last thing. Stories really have been my life, like I'll have to go into this more another time, but ever since I was a little girl, I've taken part in pretty much every single art form you can imagine. But the very first one that I ever did was write. I've kept a journal ever since I was able to write. My first stories were about lions and tigers, and in the 4th grade, I wrote about a family of coyotes that I wrote in chapters, and my 4th grade teacher would read out to the class every Friday, and everybody was like really dialed into it, and they like wanted to know what would happen next. And the main, I still remember the 2 names of the coyotes in that. The main protagonist was Arioricorn, and her coyote husband was Deduca. And then I don't know, it's something I've always done, and stories are what have gotten me through some of the hardest times in my life. And yeah, I've already said this a million times, but I just have such a reverence for stories. And so I guess when that phrase popped into my head earlier of well, what is my story? That made me go, Interesting. That's a different way to think about why am I here, I guess. So that'll be something that I will think about for a while, and maybe I will do an updated episode on in the future. What stories do you like? What series are you reading? Let me know on Threads. As always, you can find the links to all of my socials in the show notes, I believe. Check out my book, Under the Same Sky, on Amazon, my Substack, The Folklore Library, and I'm sure oh, yes, my Ambiance channel on YouTube, which has just hit over 100 subscribers, and I'm just so amazed by that because I only started making videos like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. But I love doing that as well. I'm basically everywhere all the time, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.